The crimson sun cast long shadows over the rugged alien terrain as Commander Ethan Voss ripped another bite from the massive slab of roasted meat. The rich juices ran down his chin, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand, savoring the deep, smoky flavor. The beast had put up one hell of a fight. But, like everything else on this unforgiving rock, it had learned the hard way that humans weren't easy prey. The campfire crackled, sending embers dancing into the twilight sky. Nearby, the remains of the massive predator, easily the size of a small transport vehicle, were slowly turning on a makeshift spit. The scent of seared flesh mingled with the sweet aroma of the alien vegetation, creating a strangely intoxicating mix. Voss' armor, scuffed and battered from the battle, lay discarded beside him. His black underlayer was torn in several places, revealing fresh bruises and scrapes, but the pain was a small price to pay. The reward was worth it. This was, without question, the best damn meal he'd had since landing on this planet. He was about to take another bite when he sensed movement at the edge of his camp. Standing there, bathed in the dying sunlight, was one of the most striking aliens he had ever seen. Her long, silver-white hair shimmered in the light, framing sharp, elegant features. The form-fitting black armor she wore was sleek and deadly, hugging a lithe, powerful form. But it was her violet eyes, wide with shock, that held his attention. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "By the ancients. What are you eating?" Voss grinned, holding up the piece of meat. "Dinner. Want some? Plenty to go around." The woman, clearly a member of the Velen species, the ones he had been assigned to monitor, moved closer, her expression one of disbelief. That's a void stalker's leg." Voss raised an eyebrow. "So that's what you call these things?" He took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Mean bastard tried to ambush me. Didn't go as planned." She stopped a few feet away, still staring at the spit where more of the beast was cooking. "You killed a void stalker? Alone?" Voss gestured lazily toward his plasma pistol and combat knife. "These help. But it came down to some good old-fashioned hand-to-hand in the end." Her breath caught. "You fought a void stalker? In close combat?" "Well, yeah," Voss said, stretching. "Plasma charges ran dry. Had to improvise." He patted the log beside him. "Ethan Voss, by the way. And you are?" She hesitated before answering, still staring at the meat as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Commander Saria Velkarin. I was sent to deliver your monthly supplies and assess your status. I didn't expect to find you, feasting on our world's deadliest predator." Voss laughed, rich and unbothered. "Deadliest, huh? Should have taken a picture for the report." He held up a perfectly cooked strip of meat. "Sure you don't want to try some? It's surprisingly good. Kind of a mix between venison and buffalo." Saria hesitated, then slowly sat down beside him. "Our warriors tell stories of void stalkers. They hunt in packs. They are nearly impossible to kill. They have wiped out entire colonies." Voss shrugged. "This one was alone. Put up a hell of a fight, though." She studied him, the firelight casting shadows across his sharp features. "You really aren't afraid, are you? Of the local wildlife?" Voss smirked. "Back home we've got creatures that make your void stalkers look like house pets. Ever heard of Australian wildlife?" He shook his head. "Now that's terrifying." Saria stared at him, torn between awe and irritation. "Our most seasoned warriors would never dare face one alone." "No offense to your warriors," Voss said, "but humans have been apex predators for a long time. We didn't get to the top of the food chain by being polite." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Saria found herself studying him more closely, the way he moved, the way he carried himself. There was an effortless confidence about him, a certainty in his own survival. It was both maddening and strangely compelling. Before she could dwell on that thought, the wind shifted. The distant hum of the planet's wildlife had disappeared. Voss immediately tensed, his instincts screaming a warning. He set his food down and rose smoothly to his feet. "Something's wrong." Saria frowned, checking her holo display. Atmospheric readings show a massive pressure drop. "A storm is moving in." "That's not all," Voss muttered, scanning the darkness. The air felt charged. A deep growl rumbled through the night. Then another. And another. Saria inhaled sharply. Void stalkers. Their glowing eyes appeared first, dozens of them piercing through the gloom. "They tracked the scent of their dead packmate," she whispered. Voss was already moving, securing his armor with practiced efficiency. "How far is your transport?" "Too far," Saria answered, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We'd never make it." A streak of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was closing in, bringing with it sheets of acidic rain. "My shelter," Voss said, nodding toward a reinforced structure. "It can hold against both predators and storms." "On my mark, we run." The pack edged closer, their massive forms becoming clearer. They were even bigger than the one he had fought earlier, twice the size of any Earth predator, their black scales glistening with lethal quills. Voss extended a hand to Saria. "Do you trust me?" She hesitated only a second before grasping his hand. "Surprisingly, yes." "Then run." They sprinted for the shelter. The pack exploded from the shadows, their howls mixing with the fury of the storm. They reached the door just as the first beast lunged. Voss spun, shoving Saria inside while drawing his blade in one fluid motion. The Void Stalker's claws raked his armor, but his knife found its mark, buried deep in the creature's eye. It shrieked, collapsing, momentarily blocking the others. Voss dove inside and Saria slammed the door shut. The reinforced metal groaned under the assault of the furious predators. "It'll hold," Voss assured her. He turned, suddenly aware of their proximity in the confined space. The storm raged outside, but inside the air between them was thick with something else. Saria exhaled shakily. "You saved my life." Silence stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken. "You said humans are apex predators," Saria murmured, watching him closely. "Yet you show such control." Voss smiled, dangerous yet disarmingly warm. "Being the top predator isn't just about strength. It's about knowing when to strike, and when to protect." Her pulse quickened. "And right now, which is it?" Voss' hand brushed a stray lock of silver hair from her face, his touch lingering. "What do you think?" Outside, the Void Stalkers howled. But inside the shelter, a different kind of tension built, one just as dangerous and far more exhilarating. The Void Stalkers continued their relentless assault on the shelter, their enraged howls blending with the howling winds of the storm. The reinforced metal walls groaned under the impact of their massive bodies, but they held, for now. Inside, the air was thick with something else entirely. Saria could still feel the ghost of Ethan's touch against her skin, his fingers warm despite the cold steel of his armor. His scent, smoke, sweat, and something distinctly human, lingered between them, impossible to ignore. "You would have done the same," Voss said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. But now was not the time for distractions. She took a steadying breath, forcing herself to focus. "We can't stay here forever." Voss leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Didn't plan on it. But unless you've got a better idea, we're stuck until the storm clears or those things get bored." Saria's violet eyes flickered toward the reinforced window. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the shifting mass of obsidian-scaled bodies outside. "Void Stalkers don't get bored." Voss smirked. "Yeah, I figured." Saria turned, assessing the small space. The shelter was designed for emergencies, stocked with rations, medical supplies, and reinforced armor plating, but it wasn't a fortress. If the Void Stalkers found a weak point, they wouldn't live to see morning. "We need a plan," she said. Voss ran a hand through his blonde hair, still damp with sweat and rain. "We could wait them out, but I don't like sitting on my ass when I've got options." Saria folded her arms. "You have an idea?" He nodded. "We don't fight the pack. We give them something bigger to chase." She raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is bigger than us?" Voss grinned. "A bomb?" Saria's pulse quickened. "You have explosives?" "Not exactly." He stepped over to a storage crate and flipped it open. Inside were canisters of compressed fuel, used for emergency power and heating. Saria's eyes widened. "You want to bait them?" Voss shrugged. "You said it yourself. Void Stalkers don't get bored. But they do get distracted." Saria inhaled sharply. It was a risk. A big one. But the alternative was waiting here until their luck ran out. "I assume you've done something this reckless before?" she asked. Voss flashed her a lopsided grin. "You don't make it in human special ops without breaking a few rules?" Saria shook her head. "Remind me to never let you near my war council." Voss chuckled as he started rigging the canisters together. "Deal?" She knelt beside him, her fingers moving quickly to help secure the makeshift detonator. Their hands brushed, but this time neither of them pulled away. They worked in silence, the storm raging outside, their breathing in sync. Finally, Voss sat back, examining their handiwork. This should be enough to make them think twice. Saria studied him for a moment. His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, the kind of certainty that came from experience. From survival. She found herself believing in him. "What's the plan?" she asked. Voss' grin widened. Simple. We blow the doors, set the charge to detonate a safe distance away, and when they take the bait, we run like hell. Saria exhaled. That's not a plan. That's insanity. His blue eyes gleamed. Insanity works. She met his gaze for a long second, then smirked. Let's do it. Outside, the Void Stalkers were still circling, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. Inside, two warriors prepared for the most dangerous sprint of their lives. The hunt was far from over. The storm showed no signs of mercy. Gale-force winds lashed against the shelter, rattling the reinforced walls. Thunder cracked like the war drums of an angry god, and acidic rain sizzled against the metal. Outside, the Void Stalkers prowled, their deep growls vibrating through the air. Their massive, obsidian-scaled bodies moved with eerie precision, circling, waiting for the moment to strike. Saria tightened the straps on her armor. You're sure this will work? Voss finished setting the last detonator, his expression unreadable. Nope. But it's a better plan than waiting to get eaten. Saria rolled her eyes. You really don't fear anything, do you? He shot her a sideways glance. Fear's useful. Panic's not. She had to admit he had a point. Voss stood, cracking his neck. All right, here's how this goes. We blow the doors, launch the fuel canisters, and hope the fireball gets their attention. Soon as they chase it, we sprint for your ship. No hesitation. Saria took a breath, her fingers flexing over the grip of her plasma rifle. Right. No hesitation. Voss moved to the door controls. His muscles tensed, ready. Saria's heart pounded. 3, Voss counted. The Void Stalkers growled, sensing movement. 2. Lightning split the sky. 1. Voss slammed the override. With a deafening boom, the doors blasted open, torn from their hinges. The explosive charge sent fire and debris flying, momentarily blinding the predators outside. The makeshift bomb sailed into the storm, tumbling through the air. Then ignited. The explosion ripped through the rain, a wall of fire and concussive force roaring outward. The shockwave hit like a sledgehammer, sending Saria and Voss stumbling back. The Void Stalkers screeched in fury as the burning canisters cartwheeled into the distance, leaving a trail of thick, black smoke. Their instinct to chase took over. It worked. They turned, disappearing into the storm after the fireball. Voss grabbed Saria's hand. Go. Now. They ran. The wind howled, rain stung like needles, and the mud beneath their feet threatened to drag them down. Saria kept pace with Voss, adrenaline burning away any hesitation. The ship was close, only a few hundred meters away, its emergency lights flickering through the chaos. Then from the left, a guttural snarl. One of the Void Stalkers hadn't taken the bait. It lunged from the shadows, razor-sharp claws slicing through the rain. Saria barely had time to react before Voss shoved her aside. The beast's strike missed her by inches. Voss spun, plasma pistol already up, and fired. The bolt struck true, burning into the creature's hide, but it wasn't enough. The Void Stalker roared and slammed into him. He hit the ground hard, skidding through the mud. Saria didn't think, she moved. Raising her rifle, she fired a burst of plasma shots. The beast reeled back, shrieking in pain, its obsidian scales glowing red-hot from the impact. Voss was already on his feet. Keep moving. They sprinted the last stretch, the ship's loading ramp finally within reach. Behind them, the Void Stalker recovered, its furious screech cutting through the storm. It charged. Saria leapt onto the ramp, spinning mid-air, rifle raised. Voss was right behind her. She squeezed the trigger. A final plasma bolt struck the beast square in the eye. It staggered, then collapsed, its massive body crashing into the ground just shy of the ship. Saria didn't wait to see if it would get up. She slapped the controls. The ramp sealed shut. They were safe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their heavy breathing filled the cockpit, rainwater dripping from their armor onto the metal floor. Then Voss let out a breathless laugh. Well, that was fun. Saria shot him a look. Fun? You call that fun? He grinned, leaning against the wall. All right, maybe too fun. Saria shook her head, but a small smile tugged at her lips. You're impossible. Voss gave her a slow once-over, his blue eyes lingering just long enough to make her pulse spike. You like that about me? She rolled her eyes, but the heat in her face betrayed her. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the real danger was just beginning. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air, a steady contrast to the fading storm outside. The reinforced hull had taken a beating from the acidic rain, but it had held. For now, at least they were safe. Saria exhaled, her pulse still racing from their narrow escape. She peeled off her soaked gloves, tossing them onto the console before glancing at Voss. He was leaning against the bulkhead, still catching his breath. Mud streaked his armor, a fresh gash ran along his forearm, and yet, he was grinning. Saria arched an eyebrow. What? Voss chuckled, running a hand through his damp blonde hair. Just thinking. That was the second time I saved your life tonight? She scoffed. I shot the Void Stalker before it could rip your head off. Yeah, after I pushed you out of the way of its claws. He smirked. Pretty sure that puts me ahead. Saria crossed her arms, refusing to give him the satisfaction. So what, you want a medal? He pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Nah. Just recognition. The space between them shrank. The air felt different now, charged like the calm before a storm. Saria held her ground, even as her heartbeat betrayed her. This was dangerous. She had spent years training to be untouchable, to keep emotions in check. The war between their species had only recently cooled into a fragile alliance, and she was meant to be a diplomat, not this. Voss studied her, blue eyes sharp but unreadable. You gonna keep pretending you don't feel it? Saria's jaw tightened. Feel what? His gaze flickered to her lips just for a second. You know exactly what? Her breath hitched. Before she could respond, the ship's alarm blared, a sharp, grating sound that sent both of them into action. Saria spun toward the console. Proximity alert? Voss was already moving, pulling up the sensors. No way the pack followed us. The screen lit up with red indicators. Saria's stomach dropped. No. But something else did. Voss narrowed his eyes at the readings. That's a warship. Her heart pounded. Nixan warship. The radio crackled to life, a cold, familiar voice cutting through the static. Lieutenant Starweaver, this is Commander Vale of the Nixan High Council. Stand down and prepare for inspection. Saria's breath came fast and shallow. Well, she knew that name well. He was one of the Council's most ruthless enforcers, and her former commander. If he had tracked her here, it meant only one thing. The Council had been watching. Voss glanced at her. Friend of yours? She swallowed hard. Not even close. His expression darkened. We running or fighting? The ship's weapon systems were minimal, meant for defense, not war. A direct confrontation with a Nixan warship was suicide. But if they surrendered? Saria clenched her fists. Vale wouldn't just question her. He'd interrogate her. And once he saw a human on board, she met Voss' gaze. They were out of time. Neither, she said. We hide. Voss blinked. I like where your head's at, but how exactly do we hide from a damn warship? Saria's fingers flew over the controls. By doing something very, very stupid. Voss grinned. Now you're speaking my language. Outside, the warship loomed closer, its shadow stretching over them like a beast about to strike. Inside, two warriors prepared to vanish. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Nixan warship loomed overhead, its sleek, obsidian hull reflecting the storm's dying light. Saria's fingers flew across the controls, her pulse hammering in her throat. The ship's sensors screamed warnings. There was no outrunning a vessel of that size. Vale's voice crackled through the radio again, colder this time. Lieutenant Starweaver, this is your final warning. Surrender your vessel and prepare for boarding. Voss watched her, jaw clenched. Tell me you've got a plan. Saria exhaled sharply. I do. You're not gonna like it. He smirked. Story of my life. She slammed a command into the console. The ship's engines roared as she spun them downward, heading straight for the planet's surface. Voss' eyes widened. Wait, we're diving toward the storm? She yanked the throttle. The warship won't follow us into the pressure zone. If we get low enough, we disappear. The ship shuddered as it plunged through the atmosphere. The storm thickened around them, lightning crackling against the hull. The pressure readings spiked. If they went too low, they wouldn't have to worry about the warship. They'd implode instead. Voss braced himself against the control panel. You sure about this? Saria's grip tightened on the controls. No. But unless you have a better idea? The warship fired. A streak of plasma tore past them, missing by meters. The shockwave sent their ship spiraling, alarms blaring. Voss cursed. Okay, I really hope this works. Saria gritted her teeth, fighting for control. Hang on. The clouds swallowed them whole. Darkness. When? The deafening crack of thunder. Then silence. The warship didn't follow. Saria and Voss sat frozen, listening. Waiting. The radio stayed dead. No pursuit. No more warnings. She let out a slow breath. We're clear. Voss exhaled a laugh, rubbing a hand down his face. I take it back. That was a great plan. She allowed herself a small smirk. Told you? He glanced at her, something unreadable in his gaze. You just made an enemy of your own people. She swallowed. I made that choice the second I didn't turn you in. Silence stretched between them. Then softer he asked, why? Saria looked at him, really looked at him. The human who had taken down a void stalker with his bare hands. The soldier who laughed in the face of death. The man who, despite everything, had saved her life twice. And somehow, against all odds, she had saved his in return. She should have turned him in. Should have played the role the council expected of her. But she hadn't. Saria met his gaze. Because maybe we aren't so different after all. Voss studied her for a long moment, then smirked. Careful, Starweaver. That almost sounded like a compliment. She rolled her eyes. Don't get used to it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the ship, a new kind of quiet had settled. One where the hunter and the hunted were no longer enemies. One where, for the first time, Saria didn't know if she was the predator or the prey.